Hi, my name is Scott Naismith and I'm a landscape painter. This tutorial is about mediums. First of all, we need to know the difference between solvents and oil. Solvents thin the paint, make it dry quite quickly, and they also dry matte. Oils add to the paint and they make the medium fat, so to speak. Any medium with more solvents will be lean, any medium with more oil will be fat. And this takes us to pretty much the only real rules, or that could be called rules in oil painting. There's three of them: fat over lean, thick over thin, and also slow drying over fast drying. But these rules, if you know how to bend them, can be broken. Okay, let me start with rule number one. Turpentine, pure gum turpentine, spirits, whatever you want to call them, they are solvents, and you do not want to use solvents alone. You want to always have some amount of oil in the mix. Let's now take the fat over lean principle. How are you going to stick to that? What might be quite nice to do is pre-mix your mediums according to whether they are lean or fat, and label them. You might want to start off with 1:1 until you end up with quite a fat mix to use at the end. These bottles can be recycled from sauce bottles or even shower gel bottles or something like that. Quite easy to squirt out and then seal back up again. So the fat on lean principle, it can be quite difficult to get your head around for beginners. A lot of beginners that come on YouTube looking to know how to paint are watching my videos and they're asking me, you know, do you thin the paint? Do you put it straight from the tube? Two rules: always use a medium to some extent. Don't use colour straight from the tube or you'll come into problems with cracking. And don't use just turps to thin the paint. So let's look at this fat on lean principle. It really means that if you just use turpentine to thin the paint, you're going to make that paint quite brittle once it's dried. Now if you do that in early layers of the painting, those layers are able to then absorb the oil from the fatter layers that are on top of that. Really, you don't want any brittle drying layers. So it's always an idea to add oil, even to the leanest of mixes. 3 or 4 mixed different mediums, things like that, can give you good practice to get around these things. If you just want to get started, you want to make it totally uncomplicated, then I'll give you a few rules that you should stick to. The first one I mentioned: don't use just thinner to thin the paint, always use an oil. Turps can give you quite a nice matte finish and it can also speed the drying. But instead of using turps to do these things, we can also use drying agents like siccative, which act as a fat medium, and we can also matte the finish using things like cold wax medium. So there's 2 ways to get the properties that turps brings without actually leaning your mix, making your mix more lean. Use small amounts, if any at all, solvents, i.e. turps, in the mix when you're late on doing your glazing and things. Now, cracking occurs when a layer of paint is still drying and there's movement there. If there's movement in that layer and then a brittle layer is applied, a turpsy layer, then the fast drying turpsy layer is going to go brittle, and then the movement in the still drying underlayer is going to cause this layer to crack. So this means that a thicker layer is obviously going to take longer to dry than a thinner layer. So you might think you cannot work thin on thick. That's one of the rules, thick on thin. But you can. A lot of the technique that I use is a lot of impasto paint with thin washes on top. What I need to make sure is that the impasto layer dries quickly, so I use impasto medium. Impasto medium will then act as the fat in that mix. It will actually supple up the layer and give it, so that it has give, and it will allow the layer to dry quickly so that I can use another fat layer of oily glazing on top of that. Now you do need to make sure that this is drying, and you might take it as much as a month, depending on the thickness of this, maybe more, but you've got to be patient that the thick layers dry before the thin layers are applied. But if you're using this stuff and you're using a fat enough layer on top, there is a lot less chance of that cracking. So that's it, and for you guys that are worried about this fat on lean principle, in short, just go easy on the thinners and try using more oil to supple up those layers. Also using some of these fast drying additives, the kind of Galcud mediums that you can get out there, quicken the drying, they supple up the layers, and you don't really need to worry so much about that cracking. Just avoid the turpsy washes later on in the painting process. Thanks for watching. You can subscribe and also follow me on Twitter and Facebook.